Hello everyone, I hope everyone is having a nice Thursday. In this video, I'm just going to be kind of sharing some of my thoughts about what's going on in the world. I used to work in oil and gas, no expert. I was a market reporter for a few years. I used to work with engineers to update standard operating procedures. I worked for Chevron for a year. I worked for Gyrodata, which is a drilling services company. I've had a few articles published and I've done a lot of research. For example, I did a lot of research on the Permian Basin for one article when during a different administration that was I don't know how things are going now, but that was a very huge place for drilling. Now, since I left oil and gas, I briefly returned for less than a year and then, but anyway, when I initially exited from Chevron, it was for a number of reasons. I had gotten my master's and I was ready to get out of Texas. And at the time when I was working for Chevron, this was a number of years ago, I want to say 6 or 7 years ago, prices were actually really low. The reason I'm bringing this up is I want to talk about the fluctuation. Right now, prices are insanely high. What one person recently reminded me of is that during the Bush administration, at one time, prices reached almost like to this level as well. So things can change. A lot of people think that prices are here to stay. I don't think that's necessarily true because as someone who used to work in the industry, I've seen so much fluctuation. However, I will say I think we are absolutely in unprecedented times, and this is nothing I've ever seen in my life before. And I'm sure analysts are not really sure what to predict if they're going to take out their magic ball, 8 ball, whatever, try to be, look into the future. I'm not quite sure what they're thinking. I would like to hear from my friends who work in oil and gas to see what their thoughts are. I've just heard so many different perspectives, opinions. I just want to throw some of these opinions with you. I'm going to limit what my own personal opinions are. I might share a little bit, but basically, we can all agree that the prices are hurting the everyday American, and not just the everyday American, it's harming people on a global level. So we have put in these sanctions against various countries such as Iran, Venezuela, but now the US is considering buying from Saudi. I think we already buy, but I think the Biden administration would like for OPEC to have a higher output amount to ease some of the cooling. That might be one possibility, but if we're going to work with the Saudis, who don't have the cleanest record when it comes to violating human rights, then why not also work with the Venezuelans? So basically, if we're just going to pick and choose like who the bad guy is, when really everybody is bad in their own way, maybe we should be thinking outside the box here. And I think some of these sanctions, and I used to totally believe in them, and I understand that they are a form of economic warfare and that they can have a crippling effect, and it's a pressure, it's a coercive measure to try to get an adversary or someone that doesn't agree with you it's a maximum pressure campaign with the goal of getting someone to change their mind or getting a country to change its mind. But the thing is, the people that get harmed by this are not the leaders. It's the everyday people who sometimes have nothing to do with the conflicts. So it's actually not fair. I'm no expert on this. I've learned a little bit about it as I completed like half a security studies program, but we learned about sanctions, or professors would talk about them and the goal of them, and it's about coercion, and it's a way of fighting without using weapons, but it's like weaponizing a resource. But I would like to hear from like all my friends in oil and gas, especially those who are now analysts, market reporters. What are your thoughts? What do you think our country can do to help ease pricing? I don't think we can just go green overnight and I don't think that's possible. I think that can be a transition over time, and we could definitely utilize solar. But I said I wasn't going to put my personal opinion, but here I'm doing it because I know I'm going to ruffle feathers with this. But I just don't think it's realistic to just be like, oh, we're out with this and we're going to have $10 gas for the rest of our lives. And some people actually think that we're headed in that direction. But, some people can't afford to live off that at all, especially like if there's a teacher and they have to drive an hour to get to their job and they're already barely making ends meet, or any other, any job that makes like less than 30,000 a year or less, or I mean, I know teachers make more than that, but a lot of people are living on very tight means, as I have multiple times throughout my life. I'm still actually digging myself out of a hole. But I mean, these things can have a really big impact on someone's life, and then it can impact what they're able to buy at the grocery store. We all know, and I'm sure everybody has heard the ripple effect it's having on the supply chain. We have goods going up, and so oil is, I'm no economist, but of course it's going to be directly tied to inflation. It's going to be directly tied to prices. So it's going to impact construction prices. It's going to impact the airline industry. It's going to impact, groceries because of the cost of transport. So I understand there's a need to be greener to save the environment, but I feel like we have to do it in a way that's not going to be reckless on the average person that can't afford to basically have to pay so much in oil and gas prices. And additionally, some people believe, and this is an accurate claim, that companies are taking advantage of this crisis to make record profits. And I really think that that kind of greed is unacceptable and damaging and harmful. And I wish the global community would put aside our differences and come together. And because think about how people are going to be 6 months from now when you have tons of people getting evicted from their homes, people barely being able to eat, people having to work 3 jobs to get by. Now, I do think people are resilient and they're going to find a way to like make things work. I know my grandmother's story is a perfect example of that. I've shared with some of you all that like in posts. I haven't told the whole story or whatever, but they were homeless at one point during the Great Depression and they were able to start over. But I don't really want to get into that. But my point is people can be resilient and they can bounce back from just about anything. And people who've been poor before like know how to survive and get by. It's just, I think that if our leaders want to really come up with solutions for this situation, they can't just stick to these very narrow, not necessarily narrow, but they have these certain agendas, these certain ideas that in their mind it must go this way, but it's just not working right now unless they want this all done on purpose. But there are solutions out there. I mean, there's think tanks, there's analysts. If you could combine having engineers, market reporters, analysts, talking to people from the EPA and actually talking to each other and talking to policymakers and coming up with solutions that way, like, is this feasible? What is feasible? What is outside the box? What else can we do? Like, maybe there's a possibility we could come up with solutions before this continues for 10 months. So I would like to know what some of my friends who are in the industry, what they think about this. What are their ideas? How can we make a difference? Because doing nothing and sitting on the sidelines, not that we're really going to make a big difference, especially me, since I'm not even in the industry anymore, and not that I had a lot of influence. I was more of like the data collector, as a market reporter, as a technical writer. So I wasn't an influencer in the industry in any way. I was more of a data collector. But, it doesn't seem like that long ago when we had a lot of production of oil in the US, and there's actually too much gas. And then people were unhappy with fracking. I totally understand that. I really was not following the whole shift or whatever, but and I definitely didn't agree with everything. I think maybe like we need to we don't need to drill everywhere. We do need to protect the environment. We need to be responsible, but I also believe that we also need to be mindful and responsible of everyday Americans, and actually just people in general. Like, what kind of budget are they living on, and what can they live off of, and think of things from their perspective as well. So I used to be like, oh yeah, I used to think these very narrow ways about certain countries and stuff that we put sanctions on. But the more I learn, I kind of think conflicts are way more complicated. And we do have a military industrial complex in this country that has profited off of conflict. And I think that, unfortunately, I could say more about that as a market reporter. I had people tell me some really interesting things, but I'm going to hold off on doing that as I don't need a target on my back. But my point is, we don't always get things right, and we don't have to just keep continuing to following some certain way of doing things if it didn't work in the past. And instead, maybe we should be collaborating with a wide range of subject matter experts to be coming up with new solutions and really thinking outside the box, because I don't think people are going to be able to handle $10 gas, and on top of that, inflation, and on top of that, food prices going up. I mean, I get the need to shift to a greener economy, but it shouldn't be at the point where some people end up starving to death and end up homeless. So maybe I'm being too extreme here. Maybe I don't even fully understand the picture. I'm just sharing some of my input from my limited access to the industry, and just from hearing different perspectives from different people. So what are your thoughts, and what solutions do you think could help improve this situation? Some people think that it's actually a false, that basically oil companies are jacking up prices so they'll have record profits. So there might be some truth to that, but also it's also about supply and demand. And if a certain portion of supply gets cut off, that's going to impact the price, of course, because demand shoots up and it changes the market value. But the thing is, before these conflicts, before all these restrictions, before countless sanctions, there was enough oil, and it was not unreasonably high. And at times the market was even flooded. For example, when I worked at Chevron and they were going to let go of 10,000 jobs because the market had we had too much oil. So anyway, I probably don't know exactly what the blank I'm talking about, but this is a big problem that everyone seems to be talking about, and I just thought I would share some of my thoughts. And I think it would be interesting, really, if our if our politicians would maybe engage in conversation with people that don't think exactly like them, such as CEOs of oil companies, and not just with the CEOs, but analysts, people who buy on projection, people who sell, and just also think tanks. There's people that have really good ideas, and also maybe we need to rethink our narratives. And maybe some of the things we did in the past didn't work, and we can revisit things rather than have everyone, go super broke because of inflation and they're living off of ramen noodles and beans and rice or whatever. I think that's absolutely unnecessary. But unfortunately, there's some people that think this train is going to keep going and we can't get off it and it's going this direction and there's nothing we can do. Some people really think that, and others think this is temporary. It does kind of feel like it could be permanent sometimes, but I was in oil and gas for like 10 years and I saw so much volatility and so many ups and downs, but I know this time it's not just about oil and gas, it's about geopolitics. So, and there is a lot of uncertainty. But I think that we can do more and we can do better if there's more dialogue and more of an exchange of ideas. So I just wanted to share that. And I know I am not an engineer, I'm not an expert, I'm just sharing this from my limited, experience in the industry.